Happy Friday, everyone. Excuse me. Welcome to Relentless Learning. I'm your host, Larry Abke. I have with me today, waiting in the green room, Chris Sims. I'm very excited about the show today. So without further ado, I want to talk a little bit about Relentless Learning. For those of you who might be new, some of you might be saying, hey, Larry, why did you invite me here? Well, one, we're going to talk about what I call two big ideas, which are basically aha moments, things that helped folks to look at the world differently. We believe that these things will help you as well, and that's why we present them. This week's two big ideas, Chris Sims is going to present how cognitive bias impacts a Scrum team, especially the product owner. And I'm going to present, it's not just psychological safety for the team, but for everyone involved. And in April 5th, which is our next show, next Friday, Clement Cow will present Empathy Ignites Success. When we champion our customers' success, they will champion ours. And some of you might say, hey, why else have I been invited here? Well, we're always looking for guests. And right now we do not have a guest for April 12th. So I'm working very diligently to find someone. But if you're in the audience and you're interested in that, please, there's a form that you can fill out. We put some links in the chat, in the comments already. And we welcome your comments throughout the show, because we will answer. If you have any questions or comments, go ahead and put them in there, and we'll answer them after the presentation. We'll show them up on the screen. Some of you have been here before. Thanks for coming again, and we'll make sure that that you don't have any questions. Sometime in mid to end of April, I'm going to take and do, every once in a while, we do a longer form seminar. And one of the things I'm going to do that I'm really looking forward to is I'm going to present the first class of the VUCA MBA. A lot of people are asking me about the VUCA MBA. Well, the VUCA MBA is what sponsors this Relentless Learning every Friday, or at least most Fridays. VUCA stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. This is a term that comes to us from the military. It basically is, how do we describe the world that we live in? Because it's different these days. I think you all understand that. And we look at something like AI. I was thinking about this the other day. It is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, but we do know that it's going to have some effect on our lives and has already had some effect on our lives, but it's very hard to understand where it's going. How do we not only survive in this VUCA world, in a world that's becoming more VUCA every day, but how do we thrive in that VUCA world? That's what I'm trying to help folks out with. And then the MBA part of the VUCA MBA stands for Mindset for Business Agility, because it is understanding agility and how we can use it that is going to allow us to thrive and not just survive in this VUCA world. So that's really important to understand. I've done this in the past, and it's been very well received, so I continue to do it. I have just written my third book, published it sometime at the end of last year. It's called Apke's Golden Rule of Agile, a focus on value delivery. There's a QR code there. All you got to do is scan that QR code, give us your name and email address. We're going to send you a free digital copy of it. I think it's some of the best work that I've done. I think it's really important. So hopefully some of you will take advantage of that particular offer. And I also want to remind folks, there are some links here. You don't have to take a picture of this if you don't want to. I've put them in the comments. It's important that, hey, how do I get a hold of Larry? Well, there's all kinds of different ways that you can get a hold of me. And one of the things that's really, really interesting for me, not only getting linked into a bunch of people, I have a lot of content on YouTube. So if you're interested in the things that I teach, my style, some of these shows, which we recorded and everything, there's a whole bunch of content up on YouTube. Please take advantage of that. And I love and I'm very passionate about talking about these concepts, as you can tell. I know a lot of you who are here, though I can't see who's here. And so get some time on my calendar. I publish my calendar on Calendly. All you got to do is go on there, grab a half hour. Let's sit down and we'll talk about these things. If there's ways that I can help you, if there's ways that bringing the VUCA MBA into your organization is going to help you and your organization, love to talk about it. So that's the VUCA MBA. That's Relentless Learning. I want to segue now into what I'm going to call my big idea for the day, which is about psychological safety. Now, I think most of you are familiar with this term. I think it's something that is kind of almost mainstream. But if you're not familiar with it, in fact, I was at a San Francisco PMI group last night, and the speaker was talking about psychological safety in teams, and this is obviously an important concept. For those of you who are not familiar with psychological safety, I pulled up a definition. I don't think it's the definition, but it's one definition I found on the interweb somewhere. It's defined as a shared belief that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. It means being able to show and employ oneself without fear of negative consequences to self-image, status, or career. In psychologically safe teams, members feel accepted and respected. I think most of us understand this. And this comes to us mostly from Amy Edmondson. So if you're interested in doing some more research on this psychological safety, she's a good one to follow. She's a professor at Harvard Business School. Now, I came across the term psychological safety some years ago when I was running the Job Hackers nonprofit, which a lot of you are familiar with. We used to do mock interviews and resumes reviews, and one of the companies that was that we partnered with that helped us through Hands-On Bay Area was Google. And I remember going into Google's offices in downtown San Francisco, and I ran into a gentleman who worked on something called Project Aristotle. And we talked about this. What Google did is it found those teams that were the highest performing teams, and it asked themselves a simple question: what is it that these teams have in common? And you've probably heard me say this before if you've heard through the training and everything. They looked for what I would consider the usual suspects. They looked for how many years the people were on the job, what kind of degrees did people have, how much were they being paid, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I used to joke with my friend in Google. I used to say, I'd save you a whole bunch of money, because we learned to a certain degree in Peopleware, which is an old book that we used to cover in my class. We learned that, these aren't the things that necessarily dictate who the best developers were. And so what they did is they started looking for other things, and they started looking for what, sometimes we refer to as the soft skills, but really these soft skills are so much harder. So we've got to come up with another name that better describes them. But they found that there were 5 things that they had in common. And the most important factor was this concept of psychological safety. So it was important to understand that if the people on teams feel psychologically safe, that they're going to be more productive. And by productive, I mean they're going to deliver more value over time, right? Because everybody has a kind of definition. That's my definition. They're going to be the higher performing teams, and they're going to be the teams where the people are the most engaged, and they're going to be the teams where people feel good and not only feel good, but work well. So it's a win-win, so to speak. And the thing that I noticed is that we talk a lot about teams, because that's where this Project Aristotle was emphasizing. But I also, came to me this insight, this aha moment, that it's not just the teams. It's also the managers. It's the executives. It's the leaders. It's other people around the teams that need to feel psychologically safe. And as Agile coaches, that's one of the things that sometimes we seem to forget. And so I got just a few, and so that's kind of the big idea is that if we're going to make change in an organization, we have to not just think about the psychological safety of the teams, of the people who are, individual contributors doing the work, but also the entire ecosystem. Because most of us who are in the world of Agile, and there's probably quite a few coaches here today, we understand that it's not just enough to work with the teams, but we also have to work with creating an environment within which the teams can be successful. And a lot of that is the people who people on the team report to. So recently we had guests talking about what is it that we do with leaders, or what do we do with managers in the world of Agile? So that's really important, and they need to feel psychologically safe as well. I did some research just to give you some numbers. According to McKinsey, only 26% of leaders successfully create psychological safety within their teams. So this is not something that is widespread. This is basically 1 in 4. And that was according to the leaders, because individual contributors, when they do studies, factor 8 to 12 percentage points lower than their leader perception. So the leaders are perceiving that they are creating psychological safety, while the teams themselves, the people on the teams, say it's not happening. And I think that, parenthetically, with all the things that are happening today and the layoffs and everything else that's going on, I would assume that the percentage of psychological safety is pretty low. And that's a shame. But again, not just the teams. Only 42% of managers feel psychologically safe, and only 57% of executives feel psychologically safe. So it's not just the teams, it's middle managers. In fact, I think middle managers often have a tougher challenge with psychological safety, because they're caught in the middle. They have the demands of upper management and the needs of the people that are their direct reports, and this leads to pressure from both sides. And so it can really make it difficult for middle managers to feel secure in taking risks or speaking up. And if we're doing a transformation, it's going to be really, really difficult if the people that we need to help us with that transformation are not feeling safe. And in fact, I'm sure a lot of you have seen that organizational transformations don't generally work well. And a lot of times, the folks who are doing these transformations, myself included, will comment it's the middle management. But are we asking the question, are they psychologically safe? And it's not just middle management, but it's also high-level executives. I mean, the one thing that I've been very fortunate in my career is working with C-level executives. Obviously, they feel a lot of times that they have a huge burden on themselves. Now, we may not feel for them and say, well, they're the ones who are making the big money, but it is not necessarily an easy job. And as I'm going through the research, 40% of all leaders agree that if they make a big mistake, it's going to be held against them. So the question is, for me, if we cannot feel psychological safety within the rest of the organization, how are we going to feel psychological safety with the team? So I think it's important that we understand that psychological safety is not just for the teams, though it's really important, but it's really something that we have to look at for the entire culture. And we need to help everyone to feel psychologically safe. And unfortunately, I think it's getting harder and harder, given what I can only describe as a current mania about shedding workers. So that's my big idea for the day. Hopefully that was somewhat cogent. But if not, we have a better speaker and a different speaker coming up anyway. Chris Sims, he's in the green room. We're going to bring him up here. Hey, Chris, how you doing today?
Hey, I am doing really well, and I'm excited to be on your show. This is so cool.
Yeah, this is a lot of fun. It's fun to be live, and interesting to be live. For those of you who don't know Chris, I've known Chris for some time. He's spending time in between Bay Area and East Coast, but Chris has been around the world of Agile for quite a long time. He's a certified Scrum trainer, Agile coach, and recovering C++ developer who helps organizations improve their productivity and happiness. He's the founder and product owner of Agile Learning Labs and the co-author of 2 books, Elements of Scrum and Scrum, A Breathtakingly Brief and Agile Introduction. This is where I first actually met Chris, so to speak, through his writing. And he has more writings that can be found in Agile Learning Labs blog. And I think we probably have some links there in the comments. If not, we'll put those up there. He started Agile Learning Labs in 2007. But before that, he made a living as a in various roles: Scrum Master, Product Owner, Engineering Manager, Project Manager, Software Engineer, Musician, and Auto Mechanic, which is something new for me. I did not know you're an auto mechanic. Can you describe to me any similarities between being an auto mechanic and being an agile enthusiast?
Oh, goodness. I'm not sure. I want to tweak your question just a little bit, though.
Okay.
Because the prior career where I learned, sometimes I say almost everything I needed to know to be like a manager, director, and then ultimately like this, agile person, was actually my music career. About halfway, so I did that through most of my 20s, and about halfway through, I was like, okay, I just as soon start my own band and be the band leader. And I have to tell you, being a band leader is very much like trying to help organize and support a scrum team, because you've got these brilliant people who have very different skills, but they all need to play together. And, people who are great at the music are maybe not great at like showing up for rehearsal or the gig on time. And so, kind of being that person that's like figuring out what's it going to take for this group of people to function well as a team, where when I was a musician, the team was a band. That's really where I learned all this stuff. I think the thing I learned when I was an auto mechanic was that like being excited and enthusiastic about cars as like a teenage, young man, didn't translate into like actually liking the work. I'm working on them. I thought, if I get to be around cars all the time, I'll be happy. It turns out, no, there's more to it, right?
Yeah. We're often, I've been reading up on it, we're often pretty poor at deciding or figuring out what's going to make us happy. And then we do it and we find out necessarily it wouldn't. Do you find, I don't want to take up too much of your time, but do you find being a musician, you want to speak to that and other folks from Agile? Because I've known so many people in Agile who were musicians or are musicians. It just can't be coincidence.
Yeah. It's so, well, the agile ways of working and thinking and all of that have grown beyond software development. It's where they grew up, right? And so a lot of the people who have experience in that space, in the agile space, came from software development. And something that shocked the heck out of me when it was pointed out to me was that, computer programming and music are really just applied math. And I was like, what? And it happened when I went to a party, actually, that was hosted by a math professor at the University of Illinois, where I got my degree. And in the middle of the party, he like pulled out his cello and played like just unbelievably, right? And we got to talking about how many math people were also really talented musicians. And he was the one, he's like, well, yeah, of course, music is applied math, right? It's the same stuff is happening in your brain. It's just getting expressed differently, right? It's coming out in different ways, but it's really the same underlying mechanisms. And I definitely found in my software development career, some of the most gifted developers I ever worked with were also exceptional musicians.
Yeah, I remember the one that always comes to mind is Kent Beck, because I know that he was a musician as well. Anyway, did I miss anything? Because when I bring folks on the show, is there anything that you want to promote, you want to talk about? I know you've got your learning labs, you've got trainings that you're doing. Anything that you want to talk about in particular about you and your work?
Sure. I guess since we're on LinkedIn, and probably some of the folks who are joining us are affected by, the staff reductions and all that nasty stuff that's going on right now, I will call out that Agile Learning Labs is offering all of our public workshops at half price for people who are job seekers. And if you go to agilelearninglabs.com, you'll see the job seeker pricing called out pretty clearly on the individual workshops. And so we've got public workshops starting at like $99 for job seekers. And you can get like a certification workshop for $350. So check that out. So I would be remiss if I didn't point that out. Other than that, I would say, go check out Agile Learning Labs. You can find out all the other things I'm up to. Maybe I'll call out our meetup. We sponsor the Scrum Professionals meetup. You can find that at meetup.com/Scrum Professionals. And once a month, we do a typical, like bring in a well-known speaker on some agile related topic. But every other Monday, or at least 2 Mondays a month, we do a free open office hour online. And Susan and I hang out, and there's kind of a core group of regulars that tend to show up too. And people show up, ask their questions, get some coaching, get some advice. It's fun, and people seem to get a lot out of it. So,
yeah, and I'll second that, because I've actually been part of both your meetups and some of the meetings that you have on a regular basis, and I appreciate the opportunity to join you all. But we'll get to some of the other questions and things after it. Chris has brought to us his big idea, and he's going to talk about that shortly. He's going to talk about cognitive bias and how it affects teams, and especially the product owner. So I'm going to get out of the way. I'm going to let Chris do his thing, and I'll see you back here in about 10 minutes or so.
All right, sounds good. And Andy, I see your comment in the chat, agreeing about the connection between computer science, math, and music. So my big idea is calling attention to cognitive bias and some of the common cognitive biases that affect folks who are doing product development. So maybe it's people on a scrum team, but anyone really involved in product development efforts. And cognitive bias, well, let me get into this here. So cognitive bias is essentially our brain not functioning in a logical way, right? Basically interpreting the world around us and then making decisions that if you step back and look at them objectively, you would say, oh, that's irrational. That doesn't make any sense. But the thing about cognitive bias is, in the moment, as we're doing it, it feels perfectly normal, perfectly natural. It seems like the most common sense way to approach whatever we're approaching. It's just that if you step back and look at it objectively, it's like, wait, that can't possibly be right. And one of the things that's really difficult about overcoming cognitive bias is that since it affects how we perceive reality, just knowing that we are impacted by cognitive bias isn't enough. It's a necessary starting point, but it's not enough to overcome it, right? It takes a lot of conscious effort to try to counteract our own cognitive biases, but it can be really important. So I want to take a look at 5 common cognitive biases that would affect somebody involved in a product development effort. So the first one is confirmation bias. And confirmation bias is our tendency to believe and to give more credence and credit to evidence that supports our existing position, right? Whatever I believed yesterday, any evidence that shows up that seems to, reinforce that, I'm like, oh yeah, that's good, solid evidence. See, that proves that I've got the right view on this. Conversely, any evidence that contradicts our existing beliefs, we tend to downplay and not give very much credit to, right? It's like, oh, that can't be right. Fake news. And so we tend to see the world as constantly reaffirming our current viewpoints as right, because our perception is that there is more evidence and more credible evidence supporting the things that we already believe than there is kind of contradicting it. And so, that can get us into some trouble. So next one, escalation of commitment. So escalation of commitment is basically a human behavior pattern where even as we face increasingly negative consequences, right? Like things are getting bad and now they're getting worse. We don't change course. Right? We've made a decision, we created a plan, and we're going to continue to follow that plan, right? To do behaviors that are aligned with our previous decisions, even as bad consequences are piling up and it's looking worse and worse and worse and worse. And this one is really closely related to the sunk cost fallacy. And I've run across this a lot with product development organizations. Right? We start off on some endeavor and it seems like it's going to be a quick win, right? Oh yeah, we can add this feature in a sprint. It'll be easy. And 3 sprints later, right? Everything's blown up. We still don't have the feature. And now it looks like it's going to be, 3 or 4 more sprints before we could possibly get that feature done. Rationally, we should say, okay, given where we are right now, is it worth investing 4 more sprints of the team's effort to get this feature? Right? Originally, we wanted it because we thought we could get it with 1 sprint worth of effort. Now it's going to take 4 more on top of what we've already invested. The fact that we've already invested in it makes us much more likely to continue to invest, even if there are way better things we could be doing with that, that investment, right? Even if we just walked away from it today and did something else, we would get a much higher ROI. We're actually more likely to just stick with the thing because of the sunk cost fallacy, because there's some part of our brain that's like, oh, but gosh, we got to keep investing until we get some return. Doesn't serve us. Present bias. So present bias is our tendency to dramatically overvalue short-term gain in pain and dramatically undervalue longer-term gain in pain. And one way I see this showing up all the time with software development teams, and I've actually seen this exact same concept show up in other technical domains as well, is we overvalue the importance of getting something out really fast, right? Oh my goodness, we got to get this thing out the door right away. And we put a lot of pressure on the people doing the work. And, they take shortcuts, right? They do things that are not optimal, right? We create technical debt. And sure, we get that thing, whatever it is, that feature or whatever it is, out the door a little bit sooner. So we get the near-term gain, right? We feel good. But by incurring that technical debt, everything we do from now on is going to be more expensive, right? We're going to be paying credit card level interest rates on that for the rest of the lifetime of the product. It's not a good deal, right? It really is not a good deal. And yet, I see organizations make that kind of bad choice all the time. And mostly it's due to this thing called present bias. Surrogation. So surrogation is a phenomenon where in our minds, metrics that we're using to measure something become the thing itself, right? And our brain cannot distinguish between the underlying behaviors or concepts or whatever it is that we're trying to measure and the measurement. One example would be a product owner who's tasked with increasing customer satisfaction could come to believe, without really realizing it, that the customer satisfaction score is customer satisfaction. And unwittingly, they might engage in behaviors that would alter the score, but not actually change actual customer satisfaction, right? We might find different ways to word the questions. And look, that resulted in a 10% increase in customer satisfaction. No, it resulted in a 10% increase in the customer satisfaction score, which is not customer satisfaction itself. I also run into this all the time with people kind of misunderstanding, misusing, and abusing velocity on Agile teams, right? Velocity is often construed incorrectly as something that is measuring productivity somehow. And I see teams and managers and all kinds of folks who get really wrapped around the axle of tallying up points and trying to get more points and getting into arguments about whether we can claim points this sprint or not for this work that we did. None of that relates to actually creating more product. None of it actually relates to creating more value through creating the product. And those are the things that we're actually there to do, right? Is to create valuable product. So that's another example of surrogation that I see sadly all too frequently. Next one is the planning fallacy. This is another one I see constantly. So the planning fallacy is a cognitive bias where we really believe that it's going to take less time to do things than it's really going to take, or that we can get more done in a fixed period of time than we really can. even in, even in a situation where we have lots of past history that tells us it ain't so, right? I've worked with teams that always commit to 10 stories every sprint. They've never delivered more than 5, right? Every sprint, they commit and then they deliver way less. They commit, they deliver way less. And when I talk to them, right, when I have a coaching conversation, sometimes it's a little funny because they'll say, no, Chris, you don't understand. Last sprint, we had this system problem that, became like an all hands thing that, really we lost a couple of days to that. And 2 sprints ago, we had that like last minute feature that the CEO forced us to, to add in. So that really distracted us and slowed us down. And then 3 sprints ago, right, we had the other thing that happened that oh yeah, that's right. 2 of our people got sick. And so, we didn't do as well that sprint because of that. But those were all really, specific special cases. And, this sprint will be different. I'm like, oh, that's so interesting. It's almost like there's a pattern where every sprint there's some unique special case that, anyway, you get the point. The planning fallacy, I think, is summed up nicely in Hofstadter's law. So Hofstadter's law says that everything will take longer than you think it will, even if you factor in Hofstadter's law. I really like that. So there you go. 5 common cognitive biases, right? Ways that our brain doesn't work well, that are likely to be affecting your team, your product development effort, perhaps your whole organization. Confirmation bias, escalation of commitment, present bias, surrogation, and of course, the planning fallacy. So I hope there was some value in this for you. If you'd like to come see more about what I do and what Agile Learning Labs does, come visit us on the web. Happy to see you. And thanks a lot. Larry, thanks for having me. This has been super fun.
Oh, it's great. I really appreciate that. Thank you, Chris. I want to remind folks that if you have questions for Chris or myself, anything that we presented over the last 20 minutes or so, please put those in the comments. We'd love to get to them. I love what you've done with the biases. It's one of the things that even in my my training that I don't anyway. Maybe you're seeing something different than I'm seeing, but I don't see enough in what I would consider some of the Agile training, some of the Scrum trainings. And obviously it's something that both of us are doing. My question would be to you is why do we not, one, am I misperceiving Agile training as it exists in the world today? Or 2, if I'm correct in my assertion, why do we not see more of the talk about biases in Agile training?
So here's my thought on that. A lot of the training that people are excited and interested about is like the certified stuff, which is great, right? You get like a lot of people come take my certified Scrum Master, certified Scrum Product Owner course. And in those courses, right, they're like designed to be entry level. And so we're really helping get people's heads around the fundamentals of the framework and the fundamentals of all that. And it's not until they get into some more advanced coursework that we have some space and room to get into all this nuance, right? And for example, in my advanced certified Scrum Product Owner course, we get into cognitive bias and what are some things that a product owner can do to lessen the impact of it. But I think in the most common workshops that people take, it's just, getting the fundamentals in there is enough to fill the course. But I find that in my coaching work, this is where we end up like getting to dive into this because we see it in action.
Right.
And one of the ways that people can become aware of their cognitive bias and start to be able to overcome it is to have it called out for them in a way that's psychologically safe. And that's where like working with a coach can be really useful because we can talk about, in a safe container about like, oh, that's an interesting decision you made to keep working on that feature, even though the team says it's now going to take twice as much effort as they originally thought. Is it really worth that? Right. Do you have other, and and getting to hear them say, well, but we've already invested in that. And then be able to say, let me talk to you about the sunk cost fallacy. Right. And the thing is, we all fall victim to these cognitive biases, right? Each one of us has a different cocktail of cognitive bias that affects the way we think. And it's so hard to see our own, right? I mean, I'm lucky because I'm one of the very few people in the whole world who has no cognitive bias whatsoever.
Right.
But, for most people, it's a significant issue.
Well, Ron was, when I was mentioning, Ron Lichty was with us not too long ago. And thank you for being here today, Ron. He asked the question, what do you do as a coach to overcome teams' present bias issues, not just teams, but their stakeholders, and to understand the implications of that?
So a couple of things. So one of them is establishing work norms that will naturally tend to counteract that. And so one of those, I used the example of technical debt earlier, is working with the folks who hold influence and power. So this is often managers or more senior contributors who people look up to and all that, to create norms about how do we do our work. And it's important because you can only really do this like not in the moment when, the CEO is yelling and screaming that they want something right now. And one of the norms that I found people in principle buy into very quickly is we should work with the rule of the campground. And the rule of the campground is, right, we always leave the campground a little bit cleaner than we found it, right? Meaning I don't just pack out my stuff, but that like beer bottle that was there when I got, when I showed up, I'm going to pack that out with me too when I leave. And we want to empower, and even beyond empowering, tell them that we expect our folks to work all the time in that way. And that they shouldn't even be telling us that they're doing it, right? Like working in that way where you're always chipping away at the technical debt, you're always improving the quality of the product as you're working on the product, should just be an expected norm that we don't feel like we have to ask permission to do, right? When I see engineers who are saying, well, I could probably get that done in a day if I just like did the most direct route, but there's some technical debt in that code base and I should really clean it up, but that would take me like 2 days. Mm-hmm. Like the rule should just be like, you're the person that we hired to build the thing the right way, build it the right way, right? Don't offload that decision onto people who aren't qualified to make it, right? Because if we go to a product owner and say, hey, would you rather I did this the quick way and you'll get your feature tomorrow, or the right way and you'll get it in 2 days? Mm-hmm. Right? A product owner who doesn't understand the technical implications, right? They're just like, I'll take my feature tomorrow, please. Right? So part of it is creating those working agreements in advance so that when the pressure's on, we've already got the muscle memory to like do the right thing. That's one of the approaches I've worked.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, because it is one of the things that we do with these biases is when we don't stop to think, right? And if we have the systems in place ahead of time for us, I'm reminded of even when they were doing orchestras, and they would carpet the walkway into the music hall and have the people facing the opposite, so they couldn't see the person, and have biases on site. Mm-hmm. And also they had to carpet the hall because women tend to wear high heels and they make a distinctive sound. And when they put those things in place, it was able to overcome some of the biases that were inherent and almost unknown to them, and not even conscious. And, my understanding is that we had more women now in orchestras as a result. So I think it's great that we could do that. Since I know a little bit about this and talk about this in my class, I know that in science, or at least on Wikipedia's version of science, there are over 170 different cognitive biases that humans are susceptible to, which is an astounding number. Mm-hmm. You presented 5 of the 105, 5 or so of the 170. But if you had to make a thing, which one do you think is like the most insidious in your experience in software development?
Oh, so hard, so hard. Um, I, boy, I think I'm going to go with present bias, but just by a little bit, right? Confirmation bias is also huge, but that present bias where we make decisions that they feel like the right decision, but again, we're way overvaluing the near-term pain or gain and way undervaluing the long-term pain or gain, and we do that all the time. And even me, right? So I used to be technical, right, years ago, and when I got introduced to test-driven development, I was like, oh, this is so much better, right? But even so, even though like from experience, I had internalized all the ways it's better, and including how it let me and the people I worked with go faster, there were still so many times where I would sit down to do something and I'd be like, oh, this is so straightforward. I don't need to write a test first. It'll be faster if I just just knock this code out.
Right.
And then an hour later, I'd have a bunch of code and I'd be like, okay, oh, wait, there's an edge case I hadn't thought of, and this whole approach isn't going to work. And I'm like, okay, dummy, if I would have started with tests, I would have found this right at the beginning. But still, it really felt like in that initial moment that like, oh, this will be better, right? The near-term feeling of making progress is pretty powerful.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a related thing that I've seen out there that is worth calling out because I think it's really true, is that we tend to optimize for things that feel productive as opposed to things that are demonstratively actually more productive, right? And the choosing to not do TDD in that moment is an example of that, because it felt productive to start writing the code as opposed to slowing down to write the test first. But in actuality, it wasn't, right? It wasn't more effective.
Yeah, absolutely. Michael Lyons is here. Thank you for supporting us, Michael. He's involved in a lot of the things we do. He just had a comment. He loves hearing about the biases and wishes an easy way to remember and call them. He put it's in the chat, so you folks can copy and paste this probably. There is a link in there for a visual. I use a visual in my training. For those of you who've taken my training, just to see all the biases in one place, it's just pretty amazing. Just from your perspective, because you've been involved in the Agile community a lot, and maybe it's just, again, my perception, but there seems to be some angst in the Agile community due to some of the things that have been happening over the last, say, year or so. From your perspective, which is a long-term perspective, is this a blip, or is this something that is going to be something that's going to be with us? Is it just a momentary thing, or is it a long-term trend?
I think it's a blip, right? And I could be suffering from some of these cognitive biases, right? I could be suffering from escalation of commitment, for example.
Yeah.
But no, I think it's a blip, right? And I've seen this cycle before where, it becomes all the rage for there to be layoffs and stuff like that. It's a little surprising to me because a lot of the companies doing that are actually very, very profitable right now. It's like, seems like that would be a good time to be investing in more, capacity, especially for things like software product development, where it's really not so much about controlling your costs. It's you drive profit through the top line in those businesses. There's other businesses, right, which are all about efficiencies, right, where it's like, oh yeah, the way we're going to get more profit is by really managing costs really tightly.
Yeah.
But alas, it seems to be the fashion right now. And I've seen that cycle before. And at the end of the day, like companies need good products, right? And they need good people to build those products. And so, yeah, I think the cycle is going to come around. And I also see that the pattern that happens is often when layoffs start, sometimes it's the people who are the meta level workers like scrum masters and coaches that are the first to go because it's like, oh, well, they're not actually building the product.
Yeah.
But usually, in fact, I will say every time I've done this analysis with a client, the bottleneck that's holding the client back from producing more value is almost never their ability to like create new change, create new code. It's usually around like, oh, there's a lot of inefficiency in the way we're doing it. And it's those people who work at the meta level that are the ones that accelerate that. And those positions, right, scrum masters, coaches, people like that, are what I would call very leveraged positions, meaning like if you've got a good scrum master or a good coach, they're going to turn up the productivity of a whole team or multiple teams considerably, right? So you're amplifying the value production of everybody in the system, as opposed to, you know, a great individual contributor. Don't get me wrong, we need those, but you can only do as much as one person can do.
Right. Absolutely. I appreciate that. I appreciate the perspective because I know that there's, you know, quite a few people who join us who probably suffering from layoffs and other things. It's good news that, you know, and I agree with you. I think it's a blip, and I'm hoping that things will get better for all of us in the future. I have to let that be the last comment because we've run out of time. It's great to have you, Chris. It's great to see you again. I want to remind the folks who are still here that we do this most Fridays. I try to do it every Friday. Sometimes I miss. But we do have it next week. Clement Cow is going to talk about empathy ignites success. When we champion our customers' success, they will champion ours. I'm really looking forward to that. He has a very strong following in the product ownership and product management world. So I appreciate his perspective. I'm looking forward to that chat. Chris, I thank you for your time today. We have some ways to get a hold of you in the comment, so please get a hold of Chris. Thank you all for joining us today. Look forward to seeing you next week. Have a wonderful day and a wonderful weekend. I hope to see you down the road soon. Bye-bye.